My identical twin sister killed 3 people driving drunk the night she got into Harvard pre-med, so our parents made me confess and serve her 15-year prison sentence because I was just going to community college anyway. 5 years later, the dead girl's sister found a video from that night showing my parents physically putting me in the driver's seat while coaching Vivian on what to tell police, but my family had her institutionalized before she could show anyone. Did your parents have a favorite child? When my identical twin sister killed 3 people driving under the influence, my parents made me confess to the crime and serve her prison sentence because she'd gotten into Harvard pre-med and I was just going to community college anyway. Vivian had always been the chosen one. Same face, same DNA, but she got the brains and I got the leftovers. While she collected academic trophies and perfect SAT scores, I struggled through remedial math and barely scraped by with C's. Our parents never hid their preference, but I loved my sister anyway. She'd sneak into my room after particularly brutal parent-teacher conferences and paint my nails while insisting I was smart in ways that didn't show up on tests. But Vivian had a wild streak I could never tame. When we were 17, Vivian got accepted early to Harvard, and our parents threw her a massive party. I watched from the kitchen as she did shots with her pre-med friends, our parents laughing and toasting their golden child's future. They didn't notice when she grabbed the keys to Dad's BMW. They didn't see her stumble to the car with her best friend Naomi. I ran after her, tried to wrestle the keys away, but she shoved me so hard and I hit the pavement. I was shocked. Give me one night without having to take care of you, she slurred. Let me just have fun. I was still on the ground when I heard the crash 6 blocks away. Metal crushing metal and a scream I still hear in my nightmares. By the time I got there, Vivian was standing next to the destroyed BMW, swaying and crying. There were bodies on the asphalt, a couple walking their dog and Naomi through the windshield. All of them were lifeless. Vivian saw me and collapsed, sobbing that she was the stupidest person alive and her life was over. Our parents arrived before the police, and that's when everything went from bad to worse. You were driving, Mom hissed in my ear. I tried to pull away, but she dug her nails in. Vivian has Harvard. She has a future. She's going to cure cancer. What do you have? Community college? A retail job? Dad was already coaching Vivian on what to say. The police arrived to find me in the driver's seat where Mom had shoved me. Vivian told them through sobs that I'd been devastated about her Harvard acceptance. She said she wanted to die, Vivian whispered to the officer. I tried to stop her, but she wouldn't listen. She didn't care who she took with her. Our parents backed up every word while I sat in handcuffs, too shocked to speak. The trial was swift. Who would believe the struggling twin over the Harvard-bound star student with 2 grieving parents supporting her story? My court-appointed lawyer suggested I take a plea deal. Vehicular manslaughter, 15 years with possibility of parole in 10. Vivian visited me once before sentencing, sobbing about how sorry she was. I'll write to you, she promised. I'll visit every week. I'll become a doctor, and then I'll use every dollar to get you the best lawyer in the world. I'll make this right. But I couldn't even speak to her. I'd spent 16 years in her shadow, believing that I was the only thing she loved more than her success. But now all I saw when I looked at her was a reckless color who was taking the coward's way out, even though it meant destroying my life. All I could do was hope that when she was a doctor, she'd save more lives than she'd taken. Vivian hugged me and left for Harvard the next day. She never wrote. She never visited. I found out from another inmate's smuggled phone that she'd given a TED talk about losing her twin sister to prison, how it inspired her to go into trauma medicine. I rotted in prison, alone and rapidly losing hope that I'd ever have a life again. But 5 years into my sentence, guard pulled me from my cell for my first visit in years. It was Naomi's sister Lainey. I know you weren't driving, she said quietly. I've always known. It turned out Naomi had been video calling Lainey from the car that night, and you could see the driver behind the wheel, hammered and singing. Since Vivian and I are identical, the video wouldn't mean anything to strangers on a jury, but then she showed me the end of the video, and my heart stopped. Right before the crash, Naomi had tried to grab the wheel, and she'd screamed, "Viv, no!" There it was, the proof that it was Vivian driving and not me. Lainey had been 13 when it happened, too young and traumatized to process what the video meant. She'd kept it hidden for 5 years, unable to watch it until now. I can't bring Naomi back, she said, but I can get you out. Lainey promised to go to the media and lawyers and get me free, and for the first time in years, I had hope. But the next day, I got visitors that shocked me even more. My family. Seeing Vivian's face again, glowing like I would have been without years of prison behind me, made me want to throw up. I stared at the family who destroyed my life without a second thought. Where's Lainey? I asked. Mom smiled. She's realized the video was just her traumatized mind playing tricks. She's getting treatment at a very nice facility upstate. Indefinite stay. My last hope was locked away somewhere, probably drugged into doubting her own memory. Their lawyer pushed a pen toward me. Sign that you've been coercing witnesses from prison, or we'll make sure you spend your life here. I had no choice but to sign. But as I did, Vivian smiled. Also, we've changed our minds about minimum security. You're clearly dangerous, orchestrating schemes from prison. We'll be recommending you serve the full 15 at a supermax facility. No parole. I'd just signed away my last chance at freedom and given them legal ammunition to bury me deeper. 10 more years, no possibility of early release, no way to contact anyone who might help. I had no hope left at all. The transfer happened faster than I expected. 2 days after signing those papers, guards shackled me for the long ride to the supermax facility 3 states away. The van had no windows, just metal walls that amplified every bump and turn. I tried to prepare myself mentally, but nothing could have readied me for what awaited. The concrete fortress rose from barren land like a monument to hopelessness. 20-foot walls topped with razor wire, guard towers at every corner, and a silence that pressed against my eardrums. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed constantly, casting everything in harsh shadows. My new cell measured 6 by 8 feet with a steel toilet, concrete slab bed, and a slot in the door for meal trays. The first month nearly broke me. 23 hours of solitary confinement daily, with 1 hour in a cage they called the exercise yard. No human contact except guards barking orders through the food slot. I scratched tallies on the wall to track days, then stopped when the number became too depressing. My reflection in the steel mirror showed someone I didn't recognize anymore. Other inmates communicated through toilet pipes and ventilation systems, creating an underground network of whispered conversations. I learned the unwritten rules quickly. Never show weakness. Trade commissary items carefully. Trust no one completely. The woman in the cell next to mine, doing life for culling her abusive husband, taught me exercises to maintain sanity in isolation. Letters from the outside world became my lifeline, though most went unanswered. I wrote to old friends, distant relatives, anyone who might remember the quiet twin who disappeared into the system. Most letters returned unopened. The few responses dwindled after months of my desperate pleas for help. Even my former public defender stopped answering after informing me that my signed confession made any appeal impossible. I started having conversations with imaginary visitors just to hear voices. Sometimes I talked to the Naomi I remembered, apologizing for not stopping Vivian that night. Other times I rehearsed what I'd say to my family if given another chance. The words grew angrier with each passing month, fantasies of confrontation replacing hopes of reconciliation. Prison changes you in ways you don't notice until it's too late. I learned to sleep through screaming fits from other cells. My body adapted to terrible food and minimal exercise. I stopped flinching at sudden noises, stopped hoping for good news at mail call. The girl who'd once painted her nails with her sister had hardened into someone who could endure anything. 2 years into Supermax, a new inmate arrived in our wing. Carmen had been a paralegal before her conviction, and she still remembered enough law to help other inmates with their cases. She listened to my story through the ventilation grate one night, asking asking careful questions about evidence and testimony. Her conclusion devastated me more than any judge's sentence. My parents had played the system perfectly. By having me confess immediately, they'd eliminated any chance for proper investigation. The video Lainey mentioned would be inadmissible now, especially with her locked away somewhere. My signed statement about coercing witnesses sealed everything. Carmen explained how even the best lawyer would struggle against such carefully orchestrated evidence. But Carmen taught me something valuable. Knowledge became power even in isolation. She passed legal books through the underground library system, teaching me about precedents and procedures. I memorized case law during endless hours alone, understanding finally how thoroughly my family had trapped me. Yet understanding the cage helped me see its weak points too. I started writing everything down, documenting my story in detail. Not for courts that wouldn't listen, but for someday, somehow, when truth might matter again. I hid pages throughout my cell, behind loose paint chips and inside my mattress seams. If nothing else, someone would eventually know what really happened that night. I wonder what's really going through the parents' minds when they force one daughter to take the fall for the other. There's something deeply disturbing about how quickly they made that choice, like they'd already decided which twin mattered more long before this happened. The third year brought unexpected change. Budget cuts meant doubling up cells, and suddenly I had a cellmate. Maria had been inside for 15 years, wise to every trick and scheme in the system. She took one look at me and shook her head. I was still too soft, she said, still hoping for rescue that would never come. Maria taught me the real currency of prison: information, favors, small advantages accumulated over time. She showed me how to read guards' patterns, which ones might bend rules for the right incentive. We developed a system of subtle communications, learning to convey complex messages through seemingly innocent conversations about weather or food. Through Maria's network, I learned about the outside world. Vivian had graduated from Harvard Medical School with honors. She'd published research papers on trauma recovery, the bitter irony not lost on me. My parents had sold their house, moved to a gated community near Vivian's residency program. They'd erased me so completely that former neighbors thought I'd died in the crash. The knowledge burned, but it also freed something inside me. I stopped waiting for rescue, stopped believing in eventual justice from a system designed to protect people like Vivian. Instead, I focused on surviving each day, getting stronger, learning everything I could about how the world really worked. Maria introduced me to the prison library job, a coveted position that offered 2 hours outside our cells daily. I shelved books, repaired bindings, and most importantly, had access to newspapers and magazines. I tracked Vivian's career obsessively, clipping articles about her achievements. She'd specialized in pediatric trauma surgery, saving children's lives while I rotted for her crimes. One article mentioned her engagement to another doctor, complete with a photo of her radiant smile. The resemblance between us had faded. Prison had aged me in ways her comfortable life never would. Her face showed confidence and success, while mine bore lines from years of artificial light and recycled air. We were no longer identical in any way that mattered. I started teaching literacy classes to other inmates, finding purpose in small victories. Women who'd never finished school learned to read their children's letters. Some earned GEDs through correspondence courses I helped coordinate. The prison administration praised the program's success, never knowing it gave me access to resources I'd use for my own purposes. Through teaching, I built a network of grateful allies. Former students who transferred to minimum security facilities became my eyes and ears in the larger prison system. They passed information about policy changes, new programs, anything that might eventually help. I learned patience from women serving life sentences, who measured hope in decades rather than days. The fourth year tested every skill I'd learned. A new warden implemented harsher policies, cutting library hours and restricting male privileges. The small freedoms that made life bearable disappeared overnight. Tensions in the prison rose to dangerous levels, with fights breaking out over minor disputes. I navigated the chaos carefully, using connections I'd built to avoid the worst conflicts. When riots threatened our wing, Maria and I barricaded ourselves in our cell, waiting out the violence. Guards restored order with tear gas and batons, leaving several inmates hospitalized. The aftermath brought investigations and temporarily improved conditions, though everyone knew it wouldn't last. During the chaos, I'd managed to steal a guard's smartphone for just minutes before ditching it, long enough to see Vivian's social media, where she posted about her perfect life, photos of her wedding, her new house, her pregnant belly. She'd named her daughter Naomi, claiming to honor her best friend's memory. The perversion of it made me physically sick, but those stolen minutes online had shown me something else. Lainey wasn't in any facility I could find. No records, no mentions, nothing. Either my family had lied about her whereabouts, or they'd made her disappear more thoroughly than just psychiatric commitment. The thought haunted me through sleepless nights. The mystery of Lainey's disappearance consumed my thoughts during endless hours in solitary. I traced patterns on the concrete wall, mapping out possibilities. My family had resources, connections, but making someone vanish completely required more than money. It required leverage, secrets, the kind of power that came from knowing where bodies were buried. Maria noticed my obsession during our brief interactions in the library. She'd seen this before, inmates fixated on puzzles they couldn't solve from inside, but she also recognized something useful in my determination. Through careful exchanges disguised as book recommendations, she introduced me to Cassandra, a former accountant doing time for embezzlement who understood how money moved in shadows. Cassandra worked in the prison commissary, tracking inventory and orders. She developed a system for reading between the lines of financial transactions, seeing patterns others missed. When I explained about Lainey's sudden disappearance and my family's vague claims about treatment facilities, she grew interested. Rich families leaving paper trails was her specialty. The commissary job gave Cassandra access to order forms from various facilities across the state. Mental health institutions ordered specific items in bulk, creating recognizable patterns. Over weeks of careful investigation, she compiled a list of facilities that matched my family's description. None showed any patient matching Lainey's age or admission date. This revelation shifted my understanding. If Lainey wasn't in treatment, where was she? The question gnawed at me during labor assignments, where I'd been moved to laundry duty. The industrial washer's rhythmic churning became a backdrop for darker theories. Had my family done something worse than imprisonment? The thought made my hands shake as I folded orange jumpsuits. Sebastian, a guard who'd shown occasional humanity, noticed my deteriorating state during count. Unlike others who saw inmates as numbers, he remembered names and faces. His concern seemed genuine when he paused at my cell, noting the dark circles under my eyes. But trust in Supermax came with deadly prices, so I kept my fears locked behind careful neutrality. The fifth year arrived with unexpected news. Carmen had been transferred to our facility after an incident at her previous prison. Seeing her again felt like recovering a piece of myself I'd thought lost. She'd continued studying law through correspondence courses, becoming even more knowledgeable about the system's intricacies. Her presence rekindled something I'd almost abandoned: strategic thinking. Carmen's arrival coincided with Maria's parole hearing. After 15 years, she had a chance at freedom. The prospect terrified her more than life sentences scared others. Prison had become her world, its rules and rhythms more familiar than the chaotic outside. I helped her prepare, coaching responses and organizing support letters from inmates whose lives she'd touched. The morning of Maria's hearing, she gave me her most valuable possession: a hand-drawn map of guard rotations and blind spots throughout the facility. Information gathered over 15 years, worth more than any currency inside these walls. She pressed it into my hands with instructions to memorize and destroy it. Knowledge like this could mean survival or death. Maria's parole was denied. The board cited insufficient sufficient remorse and potential danger to society. She returned to our cell with dead eyes, the hope she'd carefully guarded for years finally extinguished. That night, she told me about her crime in detail for the first time. Her husband had struck her for 20 years before she'd finally fought back. The system that had failed to protect her then was failing her still. Her story reinforced what I'd learned through hard experience. Justice was a luxury reserved for those who could afford it. My family had purchased my imprisonment as easily as they'd bought Vivian's freedom, but understanding the system's corruption also revealed its weaknesses. Every guard who bent rules, every administrator who looked away, created cracks in the fortress. Carmen and I spent hours analyzing my case from new angles. She discovered precedents for overturning confessions obtained under duress, especially involving family pressure. But without Lainey's testimony or the video evidence, legal channels remained closed. We needed leverage, something that would force my family's hand without relying on courts they'd already corrupted. The answer came from an unexpected source. During a medical checkup, I overheard nurses discussing a pediatric trauma conference where Vivian was presenting. Her research on preventing childhood accidents had gained national recognition. She'd be speaking to hundreds of doctors about saving young lives, built on the foundation of lives she'd destroyed. The irony tasted like acid in my throat, but conferences meant travel, schedules, predictable patterns. Vivian had built her career on being accessible to colleagues and media. Unlike our parents, hidden behind gates and security, she maintained a public presence. Social media posts about coffee shops near the hospital, running routes through public parks, charity events where she'd be surrounded by strangers. Her confidence had made her careless. I shared this information with Carmen and Maria during library time, speaking in code about books and authors. We developed a plan that required precise timing and outside help. My network of former students, now scattered across minimum security facilities, became crucial. Some had been released and maintained contact with those inside. Messages could travel, if you knew the right channels. The plan's first phase involved information gathering. Maria's 15 years of prison wisdom meets our narrator's fresh determination, creating quite the educational partnership in orange jumpsuits. Nothing says higher learning like mastering guard rotation patterns while pretending to discuss today's lunch menu. Through commissary orders and library requests, we tracked which inmates had connections to medical facilities. Hospitals employed former convicts in maintenance, food service, laundry, people who became invisible to doctors like Vivian, but who saw everything. We needed eyes on her routines, her vulnerabilities, her pressure points. Cassandra's financial investigations revealed something unexpected. Our parents had established a trust fund in my name, managed by them but technically mine. The monthly statements showed steady deposits, growing interest, careful management, blood money accumulating while I rotted in concrete. But it also showed their long-term planning, their assumption I'd never be free to claim it. This discovery changed our strategy. Legal ownership meant potential access, even from prison. Carmen researched cases where incarcerated individuals had successfully challenged financial guardianship. The process was complex, requiring documentation I couldn't obtain from Supermax, but it planted seeds for future leverage, ways to disrupt my family's careful control. Sebastian's rounds became opportunities for subtle intelligence gathering. He'd mention news from outside, updates about prison reform initiatives, changes in administration. Through careful questions disguised as casual interest, I learned about new programs allowing limited video calls for long-term inmates. Technology my family couldn't control as easily as physical visits. The 6th year brought a new cellmate after Maria's transfer to psychiatric evaluation. She'd attacked a guard who'd made one too many degrading comments, adding years to her sentence. Her absence left a void filled by Seba, a young woman serving time for identity theft. Where Maria had been cynical and wise, Seba was naive and desperate. Dangerous combinations in Supermax. Seba's crime had involved creating false identities for abused women fleeing violent partners. Noble intentions that had landed her in hell when one client's husband turned out to be a federal judge. Her case paralleled mine in uncomfortable ways, good intentions twisted by those with power to punish, but her skills with documentation and false papers sparked new possibilities. Through Seba's network, I learned about underground railroads for disappeared women, safe houses, new identities, entire lives erased and rebuilt. Some volunteers visited prisons, maintaining cover stories while gathering information about inmates who might need their help upon release. The system existed parallel to legal channels, invisible to those who didn't need to see it. One name kept surfacing in these conversations, a counselor named Cassie who worked with trauma survivors. She specialized in women whose families had institutionalized them against their will, using mental health systems to silence inconvenient truths. The description made my pulse race. Could this be connected to Lainey's disappearance? Carmen used her legal research privileges to investigate. Public records showed no counselor named Cassie in state databases, but alternative spellings revealed possibilities. Cassandra, Cassie, variations that might hide someone's true identity. Cross-referencing with facilities my family might have used narrowed the search further. The breakthrough came through Seba's contacts. A woman recently released had stayed at a safe house run by someone matching Cassie's description. More importantly, she'd mentioned helping a young woman whose sister had died in a car accident who'd been committed by family members claiming she was delusional. The timeline matched Lainey's disappearance perfectly. This revelation energized our planning. If Lainey was alive and in hiding, she represented more than evidence. She was proof that my family's reach had limits, that people could slip through their fingers. But contacting her from Supermax posed seemingly impossible challenges. Every communication was monitored, every visitor screened, every letter read by guards who might be reporting to my family. Sebastian's humanity proved crucial again. During a medical transport, he'd allowed me to use the bathroom unshackled, a small kindness that violated protocol. That trust, built over years of respectful interaction, created an opening. When he mentioned his daughter was studying social work, focusing on trauma counseling, pieces clicked into place. The connection was delicate, requiring patience I'd learned through years of waiting. Casual mentions of trauma counseling, questions about his daughter's studies, building rapport without raising suspicion. Sebastian spoke proudly of her internship at a women's shelter, her dedication to helping abuse survivors, the same shelter where records suggested Cassie might volunteer. Carmen crafted a letter that appeared to be legal correspondence about prison conditions. Embedded within dense paragraphs about constitutional rights and systemic failures were coded messages only Lainey would understand. References to nail polish colors Vivian had used, inside jokes from our childhood, details no imposter could know. If it reached her, she'd recognize the truth. The letter went through official channels, stamped and approved by administrators who saw only another inmate's futile complaint. Sebastian's daughter received it as part of her research on incarceration's impact on women. Whether by design or coincidence, her supervisor at the shelter was listed as Kay Anderson, close enough to Cassandra to spark hope. Weeks passed without response. I continued my routines, teaching literacy classes and working library shifts while anxiety gnawed at my composure. Had the message reached Lainey? Was she too frightened to respond? Or had my family discovered this attempt too, shutting down another avenue of hope? The answer came through unexpected channels. During commissary distribution, Cassandra noticed unusual ordering patterns. Someone was purchasing items in specific combinations, creating a code through inventory requests. Books ordered by title, hygiene products in particular quantities, patterns that spelled out messages when properly decoded. The system was brilliant, hiding communication in plain sight. The messages confirmed what we'd suspected. Lainey was alive, hidden but not imprisoned. She'd spent years in treatment facilities before Cassie's network had extracted her. My family had paid doctors to diagnose her with trauma-induced psychosis, claiming she'd invented the video evidence as a coping mechanism, but she'd kept copies, hidden in places my family couldn't reach. More importantly, she'd been documenting everything. Every forced treatment, every falsified medical record, every payment traced through careful investigation. She'd turned her trauma into evidence, building a case that bypassed corrupted legal systems. But she needed something only I could provide. Proof that my family had orchestrated the cover-up from the beginning. My hidden writings became crucial. Pages documenting their words at the crash scene, their coaching before police arrived, their threats in the visiting room, details that corroborated Lainey's evidence, creating a pattern too extensive to dismiss. But extracting these pages from my cell required risks that made my hands shake. The plan evolved through careful coordination. Former students, now free, acted as messengers between facilities. Carmen provided legal framework for protecting witnesses outside official channels. Cassandra tracked financial movements that would prove conspiracy, each piece small enough to seem insignificant, together forming an undeniable truth. Sebastian's transfer to day shift created new opportunities. His replacement, a younger guard named Wendy, had her own reasons for hating corruption. Her brother had been wrongfully convicted, serving life for another's crime. She'd taken the job to understand the system from inside, documenting abuses for eventual exposure. Our goals aligned in ways that made collaboration possible. Through Wendy, I learned about upcoming inspections that would require cell searches. Standard procedure involved removing inmates while guards tossed cells for contraband, but she could ensure certain hidden pages survived, photographed quickly during the chaos. Digital evidence that could travel faster than physical documents my family might intercept. The 7th year arrived with accumulating momentum. Vivian had published a memoir about overcoming tragedy, dedicating it to her lost sister and the victims of that night. The book tour brought her to venues across the country, spreading her narrative of redemption through medicine. Every interview reinforced the lies that had stolen my life, but also created opportunities for truth to surface. Lainey's network had evolved beyond hiding survivors. They'd begun exposing systemic abuse, using social media and independent journalists to bypass traditional channels. Stories of women silenced by powerful families gained traction in spaces my parents couldn't control. The groundwork was being laid for revelations that would shatter Vivian's carefully constructed image. My role from inside became coordinating evidence with outside actions. Through coded library requests and commissary orders, I signaled when to release specific information. Medical records proving Vivian's intoxication that night, obtained through contacts at the hospital where she'd been treated. Financial documents showing payments to officials who'd expedited my conviction. Each revelation timed to coincide with her public appearances. The pressure began showing in Vivian's responses. Her social media posts grew defensive, addressing baseless rumors and conspiracy theories about her past. She hired lawyers to threaten platforms hosting damaging content, but the internet's memory proved harder to erase than physical evidence. Screenshots proliferated faster than cease and desist orders could contain them. My parents emerged from their gated sanctuary to support their daughter. Press releases about jealous individuals trying to destroy a dedicated physician. Statements from colleagues vouching for Vivian's character. A coordinated campaign that might have worked before digital networks made truth harder to bury. Their desperation showed in increasingly aggressive tactics. Prison administrators suddenly discovered violations in my record. Disciplinary actions for infractions I hadn't committed, extending my sentence through bureaucratic manipulation. My work assignments changed to dangerous details. Subtle encouragement for accidents that might silence me permanently. The message was clear. Stop now or face consequences. But their threats only strengthened my resolve. Every attack proved their guilt, documented through Wendy's careful recording. Carmen filed complaints that created official paper trails, even knowing they'd be dismissed. We were building parallel cases, one in corrupted systems my family controlled, another in spaces they couldn't reach. The memoir tour reached its climax at a medical conference in Chicago. Vivian would deliver the keynote address about pediatric trauma prevention, her signature achievement built on stolen years. But Lainey's network had prepared something special for this moment. Survivors from across the country, women whose families had tried to silence them, would attend with a message that couldn't be ignored. Inside Supermax, I coordinated final preparations, hidden pages extracted and documented, evidence chains verified, testimony recorded through Wendy's equipment. Everything building toward a revelation that would crack the foundation of lies my family had built. But success required surviving increasingly dangerous conditions as their panic grew. A new inmate arrived in our wing, transferred from nowhere in particular files. She asked too many questions, showed too much interest in my case, whether hired by my family or simply suspicious timing. Her presence meant constant vigilance. Every conversation became potential intelligence gathering. Every moment a test of the skills prison had taught me. Carmen recognized the danger immediately. She'd seen similar plans before. Inmates paid to gather information or create incidents. We adjusted our routines, communicated through even more elaborate codes, trusted no one beyond our proven circle. The fortress my family had locked me in was becoming a battlefield where information meant survival. The conference date approached with mounting tension. Vivian's public schedule showed speaking engagements, book signings, media appearances, each event an opportunity for truth to surface, but also a chance for my family to discover and stop our plans. We needed precise timing, coordinated actions across multiple locations, execution beyond what seemed possible from inside concrete walls. Sebastian returned to night shift, bringing news of his daughter's graduation. She'd completed her social work degree, specializing in trauma counseling. Her thesis had focused on institutional abuse of women, featuring anonymized cases that sounded familiar. The pride in his voice mixed with something else, knowledge perhaps of connections between her work and mine. Through careful conversation, I learned she'd been corresponding with Cassie about collaborative projects, young counselors working with experienced advocates, building networks to help women whose families had betrayed them. The system that had failed me was spawning its own antibodies, people determined to prevent future injustices. My 8th year inside began with everything poised for revelation. Evidence accumulated, networks activated, truth prepared to shatter carefully maintained illusions. But success required surviving my family's final desperate attempts to maintain control. The girl who'd entered prison naive and broken had evolved into someone they'd never expected. Patient, strategic, and unbreakable. The conference date arrived with everything aligned. Wendy slipped me a contraband phone during her rounds, just long enough to see Lainey's final message through the commissary ordering system. She'd be at the Chicago conference with 30 other women whose families had silenced them. Not protesters or activists, just survivors sitting quietly in the audience while Vivian spoke about saving lives. I destroyed the phone immediately, flushing the pieces during my next bathroom break. The plan required no further communication from my end. Everything depended on Lainey's courage, and the network of women who understood betrayal by those meant to protect them. My role was simply surviving whatever my family attempted when their carefully constructed world began cracking. The first sign came through Sebastian during his night rounds. He mentioned offhandedly that the warden had received calls from concerned parties about my mental state. Psychiatric evaluation had been suggested, the kind that could lead to indefinite medical holds. My family was preparing to have me declared incompetent, unable to testify or challenge their control of my trust fund. Carmen helped me prepare for the evaluation, coaching me through responses that would seem stable without appearing rehearsed. We practiced during library time, me shelving books while she tested my reactions to triggering questions. The key was showing appropriate emotion without the rage that had sustained me through 8 years of stolen life. life. The psychiatrist arrived 3 days before Vivian's keynote speech. Dr. Hendricks specialized in evaluating dangerous inmates, his reports often justifying continued isolation or medical intervention. He studied me through thick glasses while asking about my childhood, my relationship with Vivian, my feelings about the accident. I gave him exactly what Carmen had prepared: sadness, acceptance, hope for eventual reconciliation. He seemed disappointed by my stability. His questions grew more pointed, probing for delusions about conspiracy or persecution. I admitted to missing my family, wishing things had been different, hoping someday to rebuild relationships. Every word tasted like poison, but survival required swallowing pride along with rage. Wendy reported that Dr. Hendricks' preliminary assessment found no immediate psychiatric concerns. My family's first attempt to silence me had failed, but I knew they wouldn't stop. The conference was tomorrow, and their desperation would only intensify as the moment approached. That night, I lay awake counting heartbeats and reviewing everything that had led to this moment. 8 years of adapting, learning, building networks from inside concrete walls. Tomorrow, Lainey would stand in that conference hall holding truth my family thought they'd buried. Whatever happened next, the lies that had stolen my life would finally face daylight. The morning of Vivian's keynote, I woke to find my cell assignment had changed. Administrative decision, no explanation required. My new cell was in the psychiatric wing. Despite Dr. Hendricks' assessment, the message was clear. My family was escalating, using every connection to bury me deeper before truth could surface. The psychiatric wing operated differently from general population. Medication compliance checks every 4 hours, even for inmates not on psychiatric substances. Group therapy sessions where participation was mandatory but saying too much could justify chemical restraints. I navigated carefully, present but not prominent, cooperative but not eager. During afternoon group therapy, another inmate mentioned seeing something strange on the communal television. A medical conference disrupted by some kind of demonstration. The therapist quickly changed subjects, but I caught the fearful glance she threw my way. Something had happened in Chicago. Wendy found me during dinner distribution, her face carefully neutral while her eyes conveyed urgency. She slipped a folded newspaper clipping onto my tray between the mystery meat and reconstituted potatoes. I palmed it smoothly, waiting until lights out to read by the dim security lighting. The article was brief, buried on page 6. Medical conference disrupted by abuse survivors. 30 women had stood silently during Dr. Vivian Chen's keynote on pediatric trauma prevention, holding photographs of themselves with family members who'd institutionalized them. No arrests, no violence, just quiet testimony that security couldn't remove without causing a scene. But the real victory was in the final paragraph. Conference organizers had announced an immediate review of their speaker vetting process after questions arose about Dr. Chen's background. Her keynote had been cut short. Future speaking engagements placed under review pending investigation. The careful image my sister had built on my imprisonment was beginning to crack. I destroyed the clipping, flushing it piece by piece. Evidence of outside knowledge could justify further isolation, and I needed to remain accessible for whatever came next. The psychiatric wing might limit my movements, but it couldn't stop the momentum building beyond these walls. 2 days later, Sebastian returned from his weekend off with news that spread through guard gossip. The state medical board had received formal complaints about Dr. Chen's fitness to practice. Anonymous sources had provided documentation about the night of the accident, raising questions about her testimony. The complaints wouldn't revoke her license immediately, but they'd triggered mandatory review processes. My family's response was swift and vicious. I woke to find myself scheduled for electroconvulsive therapy, Dr. Hendricks having revised his assessment based on emerging patterns of delusional thinking. The treatment would begin tomorrow. Memory-affecting procedures that could conveniently erase my ability to testify coherently about anything. Carmen learned about the ECT order through her prison legal network. Prison psychiatry wings really have that special touch. Nothing says medical care quite like forced ECT for the crime of having an inconveniently good memory, while your sister's career starts crumbling faster than week-old commissary cookies. She immediately filed emergency objections, paperwork that would at least delay implementation while administrative review occurred. But we both knew my family's influence could push through eventually. We needed something more dramatic to shift the balance. The answer came from Seba's old contacts. One of the women from the conference, someone who'd been silenced by her wealthy family for reporting abuse, had connections to investigative journalists. Not mainstream media my family could influence, but independent reporters who specialized in exposing institutional corruption. They'd been documenting the conference disruption and its aftermath. Through the commissary ordering system, Lainey had provided these journalists with something explosive. The original video from the night of the accident. Not just showing Vivian driving, but the aftermath. My parents arriving, coaching her on what to say, physically placing me in the driver's seat while she stood by watching. Naomi's dying moments captured while my family orchestrated their cover-up. The journalists were building their story carefully, gathering supporting documentation, protecting sources. But they'd made one thing clear. They had enough to publish, and my family's attempts to silence me were only adding to their evidence. Every ECT order, every psychiatric hold, every administrative manipulation became part of the pattern they were exposing. My ECT appointment arrived with 2 guards escorting me to the medical wing, but the procedure room was empty. Dr. Hendricks nowhere to be found. The guards seemed confused, making calls that went unanswered. After an hour of waiting, they returned me to my cell without explanation. Wendy later explained what had happened. Dr. Hendricks had received a call that morning from the State Medical Ethics Board. His license was under review for multiple complaints about coerced treatments and falsified assessments. He'd abandoned my case rather than risk further scrutiny. My family's weapon had turned against them. The next weeks brought cascading consequences. Vivian's hospital conducted internal reviews after the medical board complaints. Her research funding faced scrutiny over ethical concerns. Speaking engagements canceled as organizers distanced themselves from controversy. The golden child who'd built her career on my suffering was watching it crumble. My parents attempted damage control through their lawyer, the same one who'd forced me to sign false confessions. But he was facing his own problems after journalists linked him to multiple cases of witness intimidation. His other clients were abandoning him, his practice hemorrhaging prestige and profits. Prison administrators suddenly discovered errors in my classification. The psychiatric wing placement had been improper. The ECT orders filed incorrectly. I was transferred back to general population, my original cell with a new roommate who kept to herself. The pressure from above had eased as my family dealt with their own mounting problems. Carmen helped me file paperwork challenging my parents' control of my trust fund. With their lawyer distracted and their reputation damaged, they couldn't mount their usual defensive strategies. The court appointed an independent financial advocate to review the trust's management, someone my family couldn't influence or intimidate. Lainey remained hidden but active. Through the commissary system, she confirmed that Cassie's network was protecting her while she provided evidence to multiple investigations. The video had been authenticated by technical experts, her testimony corroborated by medical records from that night. Truth was slowly displacing the lies my family had sold for 8 years. Vivian's medical license went under formal review after patients' families raised concerns about her judgment. How could someone who'd participated in such deception be trusted with children's lives? Her hospital placed her on administrative leave pending investigation outcomes. The career she'd built on my imprisonment was collapsing. My parents' gated community began distancing itself from the scandal. Neighbors who'd believed their story about their troubled daughter now questioned everything. Social invitations stopped arriving, country club memberships quietly revoked. The fortress they'd built to hide from consequences was becoming their prison. Sebastian mentioned during rounds that he'd heard about changes coming to the prison system, new oversight procedures, better protections for inmates facing retaliation. His daughter had been part of advocacy groups pushing for reform, using cases like mine to demonstrate systematic failures. The system that had trapped me was slowly evolving. The financial advocate's report revealed what Cassandra had suspected. My parents had been siphoning money from my trust fund, using it to pay for Vivian's education and their comfortable lifestyle. What they'd claimed was careful management was actually embezzlement. The criminal implications were clear, though prosecution would take time. I received an unexpected visitor request from someone I'd never heard of, a documentary filmmaker named Patricia. But when she sat across from me in the visiting room, I recognized her immediately. It was Lainey, transformed by years of hiding but still carrying the same determined eyes that had once promised to free me. She couldn't say much in the monitored room, but her presence said everything. She was safe, protected, and working to ensure justice. The documentary cover story was just that, a way to visit without triggering my family's remaining allies. She squeezed my hand once before leaving, a promise that this wasn't over. Word came through Carmen's legal network that the prosecutor who'd handled my original case was facing investigation. Patterns of coercion in multiple cases, suspicious connections to wealthy families, questions about evidence handling. My case was being reviewed along with dozens of others he'd rushed through the system. Vivian's husband filed for divorce after learning the truth about that night. He'd believed her story about losing her troubled sister, built their life on that foundation of lies. The prenatal vitamins she'd been taking went unused as stress caused complications requiring bed rest. The perfect life she'd stolen from me was disintegrating. My parole hearing was scheduled for next month, years earlier than expected. Carmen had found technicalities in my original sentencing, administrative errors that required review. With the prosecutor under investigation and new evidence emerging, the parole board would have to consider factors they'd previously ignored. The trust fund was finally transferred to independent management after my parents failed to contest the financial advocate's findings. They were too busy dealing with their own legal problems to fight for control of money they'd already stolen. The fund would be waiting when I got out, enough to start over despite their best efforts to leave me with nothing. Wendy brought news that made me sit down hard on my bunk. Vivian had been arrested for insurance fraud related to claims after the accident. Investigators following the money trail had discovered she'd received settlement payments while I was serving time for her crime. The golden child was facing her own prison sentence. I prepared for the parole hearing with Carmen's help, but this time I wasn't hiding my anger behind coached responses. The truth was my weapon now, and I would wield it carefully but without apology. 8 years of stolen life deserved acknowledgement, even if full justice remained elusive. The hearing room was packed with observers, including several women from Lainey's network. They sat quietly, their presence a reminder that my story wasn't unique. The board members seemed uncomfortable with the scrutiny, their usual rubber stamp process exposed to uncomfortable attention. I spoke for 20 minutes about rehabilitation, accepting responsibility for choices I'd never made, showing remorse for crimes I hadn't committed. But I also spoke about survival, education, the women I'd taught to read, the life I'd built from nothing inside concrete walls. Every word was true, even if the context remained hidden. The board granted parole by unanimous vote, conditional release in 30 days, standard restrictions, regular check-ins, but freedom nonetheless. The first step toward reclaiming what my family had stolen. Carmen hugged me afterward, tears streaming down both our faces. My last month inside passed in preparation, teaching final literacy classes, transferring my students to other instructors, saying goodbye to women who'd become family when my blood relatives betrayed me. Each farewell carried weight, promises to write, to remember, to carry forward lessons learned in darkness. Vivian's trial began the week before my release. She'd been denied bail, deemed a flight risk after investigators discovered she'd been researching countries without extradition treaties. The sister who'd never visited me in 8 years was learning what handcuffs felt like, though her minimum security placement was far gentler than Supermax. My parents declared bankruptcy after legal fees drained their resources. The house in the gated community was foreclosed, their retirement accounts liquidated to pay lawyers who couldn't prevent their own indictments. They'd spent everything protecting Vivian, only to lose it all when truth finally surfaced. Release day arrived gray and drizzling, fitting weather for a freedom that felt more like emergence than celebration. I carried one bag holding everything I owned, wearing clothes that felt strange after years of orange jumpsuits. The gate opened with mechanical precision, and I walked through without looking back. Lainey waited in an old sedan, engine running. We didn't speak during the drive to the halfway house she'd arranged, understanding that some reunions were too large for words. So Vivian's perfect life starts falling apart piece by piece while our narrator sits in prison. Insurance fraud charges really make me wonder how deep this family's lies actually go right now. She'd spent years fighting for this moment, hidden but never surrendering. Her courage had saved me when my family's betrayal should have destroyed me. The halfway house was clean and quiet, run by women who understood starting over. My room was small but private, with a window facing east toward sunrise. I sat on the narrow bed, feeling space around me without walls, and began planning what came next. I enrolled in community college, the path I'd been following before Vivian's choices derailed everything. My credits had expired, but my determination hadn't. Classes in accounting and business management, skills that would lead to independence. The other students were decades younger, but I'd learned patience in harder schools. Vivian was convicted on multiple charges, sentenced to 5 years with possibility of parole in 3, the minimum for her actual crimes, though far less than I'd served for her lies. I didn't attend the sentencing, choosing calculus homework over watching her finally face consequences. My parents lived in a small apartment now, working retail jobs to afford basic expenses. They'd aged decades and months, their golden years tarnished by choices they'd made to protect their chosen child. Sometimes I saw Mom at the grocery store, but we passed without acknowledgement, strangers who shared only DNA and betrayal. The trust fund provided modest support while I studied, enough for rent and necessities without luxury. I lived carefully, saving what I could, building toward a future they'd tried to steal. Every small success felt monumental after years of mere survival. Lainey introduced me to her support network, women who'd survived family betrayal and built new lives from ruins. We met weekly in community centers and coffee shops, sharing stories and strategies. Some had been silenced for decades before breaking free. My 8 years seemed almost brief in comparison. I graduated with honors, my accounting degree earned through night classes and weekend study sessions. The ceremony felt surreal, walking across a stage to collect proof of achievement they'd said I'd never reach. Lainey cheered from the audience, the sister I'd chosen replacing the one who'd chosen herself. My first job was entry-level bookkeeping at a nonprofit supporting abuse survivors. The pay was modest, but the work meaningful, using skills learned in prison to help women rebuild. Every balanced ledger felt like defiance against those who'd written me off as worthless. Vivian served 2 years before early release for good behavior. She'd lost her medical license permanently, her marriage dissolved, her reputation destroyed. Last I heard, she was working at a clinic in another state, drawing blood and filing paperwork. The golden child had become ordinary, her wings clipped by truth. I moved into my own apartment on the 5th anniversary of my release. Nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom with good light and quiet neighbors. But it was mine, earned through work and patience, furnished with secondhand pieces that felt like treasures. The first night, I sat by my window watching stars I hadn't seen clearly in 13 years. My parents reached out once through a lawyer, seeking reconciliation, or perhaps just forgiveness. I didn't respond. respond, having learned that some bridges burned couldn't be rebuilt. They'd made their choice that night by the crashed BMW, and I'd survived the consequences. Nothing required me to absolve them. I still teach literacy sometimes, volunteering at the local jail on weekends. The women there remind me of myself and Maria and Carmen, trapped by circumstances and systems designed to punish rather than rehabilitate. I share what I learned about survival and patience, about building strength from nothing. Lainey remains my closest friend, the bond forged through shared trauma stronger than blood. We have dinner every Sunday, cooking together in her kitchen while her cat weaves between our legs. She's studying law now, inspired by Carmen's jailhouse expertise, determined to help others escape family betrayal. The nightmares faded gradually, replaced by dreams of ordinary things. Sometimes I still wake expecting concrete walls and steel toilets, but morning light through my window reminds me that I'm free, not just from prison, but from the weight of their expectations and betrayals. I keep a photo on my dresser from graduation day, not of me in cap and gown, but of the women who'd stood by me when family failed. Lainey, Carmen out on parole, others from the network who'd shown me that chosen family could heal wounds blood relatives inflicted. Their faces remind me daily that survival is its own victory. My life now is small and quiet and entirely mine. I work, study, volunteer, build relationships based on truth rather than manipulation. Every ordinary day feels extraordinary after 13 years of stolen time. I'm not the girl who'd painted nails with her sister, but I'm not the prisoner they'd tried to create either. Sometimes I think about that night, how different everything might have been if Vivian had given me the keys. But dwelling on alternate histories serves no purpose. I survived what happened, built strength from suffering, found freedom in truth. That's enough. That's everything. Appreciate you sticking around while I tossed in my clever little comments. Hopefully the puns didn't sting too much. Catch you in the next story, friends. Like the video. It helps more than you think.